So our first panelist is Taylor Paslowski. She is the incoming Rubenstein intern at OSU Hillel. She is currently a fifth-year student at Hebrew Union College and president of the Rabbinical Student Association there. She went to William Jewell College and studied religion and history. Thank you, Taylor.
First, I want to take a minute to thank Praneeth and Jack for their work to coordinate this evening's program. The relationship between the OSU chapters of Hindu Yuva USA and Hillel organizations is very important, and I'm glad that we can come together to engage in dialogue about a challenging and deeply emotional topic. After German archaeologist and businessman Heinrich Schliemann excavated the ancient Greek city of Troy, uncovering almost 2,000 instances of the swastika, he drew connections to similar shapes in the archaeological remains of the Germanic tribes. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum states that other European scholars and thinkers linked this symbol to a shared Aryan culture that spanned Europe and Asia. German nationalists seized on this explanation, twisting it to make the connection solely between Greek and German descendants from an Aryan race. This made it much easier to claim that a German superior race needed to remain pure, an idea that took off after Germany's devastating defeat in World War I. Several German nationalist groups adopted the swastika as part of their imagery, at the same time refusing to accept the legitimacy of the Weimar Republic. Next slide. In 1920, Hitler and the Nazi Party formally adopted the swastika as its symbol. The Nazi flag, with its red, white, and black, the colors of the German Empire flag, signaled a rejection of democracy and a desire to return to the empire of old. Slide. The swastika, or Hakenkreuz, Fruchtkreuz in German, was plastered across Nazi propaganda. Slide. And its new meaning as a symbol of Aryan identity, exclusion, and hatred took root. By 1933, when the Nazi Party took power, it flew the Nazi flag alongside the old German Empire flag. At its annual party convention in Nuremberg in 1935, racial purity laws, which forbade Germans and those of kindred blood from marrying or having sexual relations with Jews, were established. And the Nazi flag became the sole flag of the German Reich. The one caveat was that Jews were not allowed to fly the Nazi flag or German national colors. It had become a symbol of their oppression and disenfranchisement. When everyone else can fly a flag that you are not allowed to use, it's a sign that you are different. This is not for you. You are not worthy. In Nazi Germany, the swastika showed Jews that they were not welcome, that they were actively hated, and potentially in a lot of danger. It was used to sow the seeds of fear and silence Jewish voices. It was everywhere, on flags, the patches of SS men, the Schutzstaffel, a paramilitary group run by Hitler and the Nazi Party, men in the German military, and the Gestapo, Hitler's secret state police, who terrorized Jewish people. Slide. The SS and the Gestapo enforced the racist policies of the Nazi Party, whose restrictions on Jewish people increased the longer they were in power. These men marched through the cities in their brown or gray shirts with red swastikas on their armband and high black boots. The sight of soldiers marching in unison in drab colors aside from the eye-catching red swastika must have been striking. The sounds of their black boots stomping on the pavement must have sent shivers down people's spines. They knocked on Jewish doors, raided homes for valuables, and roughed up children to instill fear. As conditions worsened for the Jews, these men patrolled the Jewish ghettos, shooting those who escaped. An official German announcement posted in the Warsaw Ghetto read, "Jews who leave the quarter reserved for them without permission are liable to the death penalty." In addition to murdering Jews on the spot for escaping, SS men arrived and hauled Jewish men, women, and children to concentration camps for forced labor and extermination camps straight into the gas chambers. When the trains arrived at the camps, Jews were met with more guards bearing the swastika on their arms. That arm signaled, separating them, the weak to one side and the strong to another, the elderly and young children here, and those capable of strenuous labor there. And it was not Jews alone who were sent to these camps. Germany sent away its mentally and physically disabled, those who were homosexual, as well as Polish people, Roma or Gypsy, political prisoners, communists, French people, and people from the Soviet Union. The swastika, or Hakenkreuz, is a symbol of hatred and persecution for many beyond the Jewish people. It was an intimidation tactic then, and it continues to be one today, which Wade will talk about a little later. Imagine for a moment that you are a Jew living in Austria in 1938, when the country enthusiastically welcomed Nazis during its annexation to Germany. Your fellow Austrian citizens see it as the unification of Greater Germany, a pure German bloodline. And you're the enemy. Slide, please. Your neighbors clutch the Nazi flags with the swastika boldly centered as they excitedly hurry to the parade. Thousands more line the streets waving the same flag, while German Nazi soldiers march through your town, a larger version of that same flag carried by a soldier at the front. The swastika on it is the identity of the Nazis, and they are pure evil. Seeing that one symbol, your heart starts beating faster, your chest tightens, your mouth goes dry, and you break out in a sweat. Maybe you start trembling, and you can't quite steady your voice when you speak. This is terror. It's a primal emotion, deeply felt, and it defies all logic. Many Jews know this feeling all too well. Slide, please. In March of last year, a group of teens from Newport Beach and Costa Mesa went viral for creating a swastika out of red plastic cups and taking photos around it with the Nazi salute. It deeply hurt and angered the Jewish community, including many Holocaust survivors living in the area and across the United States. One survivor, Eva Schloss, took it upon herself to reach out and educate those students. She shared her story of surviving unimaginable horrors and why the swastika was a symbol of hatred that sparked fear and anger in so many people. Eva said, "I myself have been in Auschwitz. I lost mainly my whole family. The only survivor was my mother. I lost my father and my brother and many, many close relatives. And life afterwards became very, very hard to start a new life in a different country. But I realized that it is important that people should never, ever forget what has happened and how it came about. When I heard about this incident here, I was shocked that in 2019, in a well-educated town, in a very high-educated school, that incidents like this should still happen. And I was very keen and willing to come and speak and hear from the children themselves. You know, they were a bit drunk, I suppose, which they shouldn't be at that age, but it does happen. And I think they really didn't think about the consequences. I think they have learned a lesson for life. Perhaps it was a good thing that it happened because it has now come in the open. I was 16 when I came back out of Auschwitz, hoping that my family, especially my close family, my father, my brother, my mother, would have survived, that we would be a family again. So I was their age when I realized my life had completely shattered. I will never have a family again. We have to learn from the history and the mistakes we have made and try to make a safer and better world for everybody. And I think this school has got the message, and I hope the state will have got the message too. So this symbol carries a lot of weight. There is deep pain embedded within it. For Jewish people, we start learning about the Holocaust when we are in religious school in 3rd or 4th grade. We learn about how a group of people hated us so much that they wanted our entire people gone. As we get older, we hear the stories of Holocaust survivors. We see and hear the pain, fear, and anger, and the warning, never again. Depending on where we grew up, we experienced anti-Semitism for ourselves. When I heard about the New York bill 6644, it felt like a big win. Holocaust education in American schools is getting slimmer and slimmer, and anti-Semitic attacks are increasing at a shocking rate. To hear that the swastika would be taught as a hate symbol gave me some hope that maybe with better education, children would understand and empathize rather than using it as a sign of teenage rebellion. And once they become adults, they would not participate in groups that profess such evil and hatred. As I read more about the bill, I understood more of the pain of our Hindu brothers and sisters. Their religious symbol had been co-opted by an evil regime. An extremely difficult conversation to have. How do we teach about something that has such wildly different connotations to people? I want to be honest with you all. I don't have the answer to this. There is a lot of nuance to this situation. While I desperately do not want to see this symbol in the public sphere, I want people to hear about its history, both the religious and the hateful. I do not want that history to take away from the sheer terror it evoked for so many Jews, but I do understand that it is a religious symbol and a symbol of something far greater than the hate that was evoked during the Holocaust. It's not an easy thing to talk about, and I don't think that there's an easy solution. But I, again, am so grateful for this opportunity for us to have this discussion tonight.
Thank you, Taylor, for those incredible words and perspective on this very sensitive subject. For our second panelist tonight, also from Ohio State Hillel, is Wade Melnick. He is the Ezra Jewish Education Specialist at OSU Hillel. And as a graduate of Binghamton University, he infuses Jewish learning with innovative, pluralistic, and experiential Jewish education techniques. Wade Melnick.
Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, educate, and learn with everyone here. What we are doing now is no small feat. People coming together to actually learn from one another is the very pinnacle of interfaith dialogue. It represents a monumental gesture of goodwill, something we need more of these days. I spent many of my teenage years studying Kung Fu. Most of the time, it was with my teacher on Long Island. From 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday, I trained with him, trying to emulate what it took him over 6 decades to master. Day in and day out, I practiced, fought, and bled to try to become the person my teacher knew I could be. As fall rolled around, our training became increasingly difficult. Tournament season was a big deal, and only the best students were chosen to compete. Eventually, I was eligible to try out for the competition. After achieving the standard for competing and representing the school, my teacher gave me the date, time, and location of the event. I told him that I could not make it there due to my parents' busy schedule. With a kind gesture, he offered to drive me himself. After I secured my equipment in the trunk of his car, I climbed into the back and buckled my seatbelt. As I shifted to get more comfortable, something on his dashboard caught my eye. Hanging from the rearview mirror was a small Buddhist icon, nothing out of the ordinary, except for a shiny swastika attached to the top of it. I was overcome with a primal sense of shock, terror, horror, and for the first time in my life, I felt that I might be in mortal danger. What if this whole time my teacher had just been a part of some elaborate neo-Nazi plot and I was the next victim? Thoughts like this and more raced through my mind, and I thought about how I could break out of the car if I needed. For a brief moment, I thought of reaching into my equipment bag to pull out some sort of weapon. I even remember starting to turn around and reach for it. The thought that stayed my hand, that brought me back down to earth, was that my teacher too was Jewish. He must have read the look on my face, because without even asking, he explained what the symbol was and why it was there, that it was a symbol to Buddhists and Hindus of peace, love, and harmony. This had little effect though, as I was sure I was about to be kidnapped and my body thrown in the Long Island Sound. How could you have that thing swinging in the front of your car? Don't you know it's a symbol of hate to civilized people all over the world? I screamed at him. I was furious. I could not believe my teacher, whose approval I wanted more than anything in this world, would string a swastika to the front of his car. On the verge of tears, I opened the door of his car, took my gear, and went home. I did not speak to him or attend classes for a few weeks after the incident. When I returned, we did not speak on the subject, and our relationship has never been the same. To this day, my Jewish teacher still has a swastika hanging from the rearview mirror of his car. To so many people around the world, the swastika and savastika are symbols that represent good fortune, luck, peace, harmony, and fertility. At the same time, the swastika is also a symbol of hate, despair, murder, and genocide. We must find a way that both communities can make their peace with how the symbol should be used today. To do that, we must understand where the swastika comes from, its origin and history, and then understand it in a modern context. How does the modern view conflict with its original purpose? And finally, we must decide if the swastika is now viewed as a symbol of terror, if it still has a place in any society that promotes peace, love, and life. Next slide, please. The first swastika design dates back to some 15,000 years ago. In 1908, at the Paleolithic settlement in Mezin, in modern-day Ukraine, archaeologists found a small ivory figurine of a female bird. On the torso and tail feathers are intricate patterns of joined-up swastikas. The vessel the bird was found in also contained phallic objects, which supports the idea that the swastika was initially a symbol of fertility. Next slide, please. From there, we can track the swastika to Southeastern Europe. Around 5000 BCE, the symbol began to adorn pots and vases. However, the swastika is used less for any sort of symbolic meaning and more for decoration. This is supported by an overwhelming number of swastikas and many different styles of pottery, all for different purposes. Not all the images are shown here. Next slide, please. The Bronze Age is when the swastika really begins to spread across all of Europe. In the Ukraine's Natural History Museum, there's a large collection of bronze pots that are all adorned with a swastika near just under the brim. It is also during this time that the ancient Greeks begin to use the swastika as a decoration on their utensils and in their architecture. For thousands of years, the ancient world used the swastika as a symbol of fertility, but was more commonly used as a simple design or ornation. Excuse me. In approximately 500 BCE, during the golden age of ancient Greece, the swastika first appeared in India, around the same time as the first written copies of the Vedas, Hinduism's holy texts, and are believed to have been written down. Since its inception, the Vedas and the swastika have been intimately connected. Next slide, please. In the medieval era, the swastika begins to affect a new meaning in the East than it does in the West. But as we will come to see the swastika for a short time, the West adopts the Eastern counterpart's values. In Europe, the swastika continues to be a decorative art piece, sometimes emblazoning a family's coat of arms. Next slide, please. But the swastika was not exclusive to the Old World. In the New World, the Anasazi tribe in the Midwestern United States have been using the swastika as a religious symbol since around 1500 BCE. And when the colonists came a millennia later, the symbol came with them too. The swastika even continued to be a common symbol in the 20th century, with well-known companies adopting the symbol as part of their brand. Next slide, please. Even the US military and Royal Air Force decorated the symbol on their planes in World War II, as seen here. It was clear then, by this time, the symbol was not simply superfluous, but had actually adopted the Eastern meaning of luck and good fortune. But despite a history of both religious and secular positive superstition, that changed when the blood of millions stained its legacy. This began with the adaptation by the Nazi Party, the most evil organization in history, and was used as their rallying symbol. We've already heard from Taylor about World War II and the Nazi use of the swastika, so instead I'll fast forward to 2020. Next slide, please. To understand how modern America views the swastika, you do not need to do anything more than turn on your evening news. Between a rampant pandemic, genocide in Yemen, ethnic cleansing in China, and a looming election, there's always space for anti-Semitism. Just take a look at this past week in Minnesota. A couple, while shopping in Walmart, did their civic duty and put on a mask. Only, they took this opportunity to showcase their political views for everyone to see. Next slide, please. This is just one instance of anti-Semitism. In 2020 so far in the US alone, there have been over 500 reports of anti-Semitism. Over half of those are nonviolent and involve obscene drawings in some way, almost always involving some sort of swastika. In the rest of the world, there are less overall anti-Semitic incidents, but they are usually more violent in nature. When I spoke to a Jew from France from last year while I was living in Israel, we swapped personal stories of anti-Semitism. Both of us fear wearing kippahs in our native countries, but for two different reasons. I do not wear a kippah usually because I get strange stares and shoves every so often. He did not wear a swastika because more and more often Jews are being stabbed and robbed in French cities. He told me how much he missed Paris, but that the anti-Semitism there was so horrendous, like when he was robbed at knife point and called a Jewish pig in German. Anti-Semitism is just as prevalent now as it was back in the 1930s. People are just more subtle about it. And the thing that connects the antagonist in his story and the one in mine is that they both rally behind the swastika. This photo of a Jewish cemetery in Worms, Germany speaks volumes about just how much people still cling to the swastika as a symbol of hate against Jews. To those who might think that the Holocaust in World War II was almost a century ago, how bad could it possibly be? Allow me to share one last story to drive home my point. Last slide, please. This story, written in the first person, comes from someone very dear to me. In 2015, I distinctly remember heading towards the shuttle between Times Square and Grand Central 42nd. I was going about my everyday business, looking down at my phone, generally tuning out most of the world like any millennial, and stepped onto the train. I suddenly felt as though someone had kicked me in the chest and then stood on it. I couldn't breathe and was immediately backed off the train, trying to wrap my mind around what I just saw. I didn't think to stop any of the people getting into the car after me, but I distinctly saw the same reaction happen, but perhaps more exaggerated to this elderly couple. I remember the man was using a walker and had to lean on it to keep himself upright. I wasn't sure if I was experiencing was panic, but to these two elderly folks, they almost certainly were. This wouldn't be uncommon in New York City at that point, as advertising for The Man in the High Castle, an alternate history tale that reimagines the present if Germany had won World War II, had begun popping up, plastering subway stations, but more disturbingly, the inside of subway cars. As we had each stepped onto the train, we saw images of Nazi Germany, but more specifically the swastika, covering more than half of the seats and walls. To call this tone deaf would be an understatement. As I said before, there was a rash of elderly folks, Jewish folks, experiencing real panic attacks. Their brains skipping past any thought that wasn't, we're in danger, it's happening again. And as a member of a younger generation experiencing the same, we were certainly not immune. This happened only 5 years ago. Train cars in New York City plastered in Nazi paraphernalia. Someone, somewhere, thought this was a good idea, shared it with a group of people who approved it, and went to an executive who then approved it, a production team who drew up the plans, and then a team of people who actually put the symbols in the train cars. Not one person out of all of those people thought that this was a bad idea. Our wounds have not healed. The Jewish community will be scarred by the events of the Holocaust for centuries. The swastika today, whether attached to a Buddhist icon or sprayed painted on the graves of the dead, carries the same meaning. If a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, then the Hakenkreuz by any other name would feel as horrifying. While it once may have meant good fortune, luck, and harmony, it is now soaked in the blood of 72 million people. The swastika is not just a symbol recognizable by Jews, but by the whole world. Over 85 million people died in World War II, 85% of which were fighting against the Nazis, against the swastika. But even Germany itself banned the symbol in its country. The native Anasazi people, who have been using the swastika for close to a millennia before World War II, banned the use of the symbol in their ceremonies and art. I understand how intertwined with Hinduism the swastika is, and it is an absolute shame that the Nazi Party appropriated the swastika, turning it into this universally hated symbol. I wish the world could see the swastika as a symbol of peace, but I also wish the world were not so full of anti-Semitism. When I see a swastika, the first thing I feel is dread and terror, things that are antithetical to the swastika's ancient meaning. I wish I did not, but for me and many other Jews, and most people around the world, the swastika is a reminder that the world still hates Jews.
Thank you so much for that, Wade. Next up, our next panelist is Vinod Sastriji. Raised in Bowling, California, Vinod Sastriji has been involved in various Hindu cultural groups, as well as being an active practitioner of yoga and meditation for most of his life. He currently lives in Seattle with his wife and son and teaches mathematics at North Seattle College. Vinodji?
Thank you, Praneeth. And thank you, Jack, as well, for Hindu Yuva and Hillel coming together. It's a pretty unique and tough topic also. And I really appreciate Wade and Taylor speaking so frankly about how much a challenge it is, because I think the first thing as a human being that really is expected is for each of us to empathize with each other and understand how the other person experiences the world. Because without that, there's really no way to make progress. So I really, again, appreciate both of you and as well as Praneeth and Jack for coming together for this particular session. Next slide, please. So what I thought before diving into the swastika itself, it only makes sense as we have seen the backdrop of how normally if you see a swastika around somewhere, immediately there's a feeling of, oh my gosh, I mean, how can somebody put this up, as Wade and Taylor so eloquently mentioned. What I thought was to give a kind of backdrop first about what really Hinduism, just in a very capsuled form, some of the essential teachings and how the swastika fits into that, because without that, it's very difficult to even view it as something that's really positive. So for a moment, I'm gonna just take a step back from talking about the swastika itself and talk a little bit about what is the essence what is really Hinduism all about, and how is it relevant for us, and where the swastika fits in there. Next slide, please. So one of the basic questions that really pervade everybody's life, anybody who's on this planet has this question. Who am I? What am I all about? What are my interests? What are my passions? What kind of person do I want to meet? What kind of career do I want to do? People take, BuzzFeed quizzes. People take the MBTI test, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. People go to astrologers or even people with parrots and little, they'll just pull out a tarot card and tell you what you're all about. Everybody who's anybody wants to know who they are. And so in the process, as we develop as human beings, we develop various identities. I'm a good person. Maybe you think of yourself as a very good looking person, or maybe you think of yourself as a very moral person. Maybe you're very successful or smart or intelligent. So many identities that come up in our lives, and we kind of attach ourselves to it. We say, oh man, today I'm a Fortune 500 owner. I'm not a Fortune 500 owner. I'm pretty a very middle class guy here, but maybe you became a very successful person and suddenly you feel like, my God, I'm really successful. And And then COVID or something hits and bam, tomorrow you're bankrupt and your whole identity is washed off. And so there's this immense challenge that no matter what identity you develop, maybe today you feel you're a very good person, but then tomorrow it's very possible that even the best of persons can say or do something that is very hurtful to others. And so there's this constant challenge that we develop these self-images, and yet these self-images are constantly challenged by our experiences in life, by others, and by society at large. And so the ancient rishis, the ancient saints of India, they realized that somehow whatever identities we're thinking ourselves as, even as this physical body, I might think of myself as this person who has this, average looking face with this nice kurta and so on and so forth. But that really may or may not be who I am. And so what they did was they went out into remote areas, into the Himalayas, into forests, even while they were living in the regular world, and did a certain amount of meditative inquiry, I'd like to say. And so let's go to the next slide, please. And so one of the ancient, the Vedas has been mentioned. In the Vedas, there is the philosophical portion of the Vedas that is called the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, there is a conversation between what they call Guru and Shishya, the teacher and the disciple. And so the teacher is asking the disciple, do you know who you are? Just like anybody, I might go up to somebody and ask you, hey, so who are you? But he's not asking just, what are you doing as your occupation? The Guru is asking, who are you really? And the disciple, being kind of an honest person, he says, I actually don't know. So he says, why don't you inquire about it? Look into it. So he says, okay, let me go and inquire and do meditation and certain practices. And he comes back and he says, you know what, I realized I am this physical body. If I don't have this physical body, then I don't exist. So this is who I am, this physical self, this hand, this face, and so on. That's who I am. And the Guru says, oh, you did really good, but why don't you inquire a little more? That's great, but keep going. So he goes back, he does more inquiry. And he goes within, he looks within, and he realizes, oh, I'm actually there's this energy in me. I breathe, I have what they call prana in me. There's a life force in me. And because that's there, that's who I am. What they call pranamaya kosha, what they call the second layer of ourselves. And the Guru says, that's really good. You're doing really well. Why don't you inquire a little more? And then he goes back, he does a little more inquiry, and he realizes, you know what? I have this mind that's producing thoughts and emotions and things that I like, things that I don't like, what I want to do today, what I don't want to do today. And he goes back to the Guru and he says, I am actually this mind. Without my mind, I don't exist, because everything that I am is based off of the mind. And he says, that's really good. You're getting there, but keep going more. Then he goes, does more inquiry. He realizes it's not just the mind. Today, my mind might say, I want a chocolate chip cookie, but my power of discrimination might say, you know what, that cookie has a lot of calories. Maybe I shouldn't be eating that cookie. So there's a higher mind that allows us to discriminate between what is good and what is bad, what I should be doing or not. Our belief systems get embedded in this part of our mind. It's not really the chaotic mind that's going crazy all the time. And if I say, don't think about an elephant, you start thinking about an elephant, that's kind of the lower mind. But there's the higher mind that's really, it's where our power of intellect really arises from. And he says, it's called Vijnanamaya Kosha in Sanskrit. He says, I'm the Vijnanamaya Kosha, I'm this deeper mind. And the sage says, that's really good. Why don't you do a little more inquiry? And in that last stage of inquiry, the fifth kosha, they call it the fifth layer, he realizes that there is actually, and all of the sages and rishis of India, the saints of India, they have kind of come to this similar conclusion that there's actually a kind of consciousness, a spirit that lies within that's deeper than all of the mind, body, intellect, all of those things that we're sort of normally used to using in our daily life and that we identify with as ourselves. There's something much subtler than that. And that is that consciousness and that spirit that pervades the entire universe. And it's also who we are as individuals. Next slide. And so what they developed was, not everybody is going to just be able to directly say, you know what, I'm going to go and do all this meditation and discover who I am. Well, for every human being, we have certain needs. We need to have certain security, certain money in our life. We have desires. We want to talk to people. We want to have intimate relationships. We want to be accepted in the world. We want to be recognized. There's so many desires that we have, and having those desires met in a healthy and harmonious way, those are the first two. They're called artha and kama, the need for basically money and security, and the need to fulfill our desires. But then we have to align these two, these desires that we have, the needs that we need to fulfill on the material plane, have to be aligned with a certain, the deeper part of nature. So for example, if you take a river, the way we would say it in Hinduism is that the dharma of the river is to flow. The dharma of water is to flow. And in a similar way, we are also part of nature to align ourselves with the natural order. That's what really dharma is all about. And so they have developed, that is what's called the third Purushartha, or the third goal of human life, is to recognize how we really fit into the larger universe, the world at large, the society at large, people at large. I need to be not in conflict with the world at large. And that is essentially discovering what our dharma is. But beyond that, this fourth goal, which is essentially what we were talking about in the previous slide, is to not just be aligned with life, but to really discover who we are in a deep spiritual sense. Because to only identify with ourselves on the material plane is to ultimately be in conflict. Because as long as we identify ourselves with these different images, being a good person, a bad person, I'm good looking today, I grew old, I'm not good looking tomorrow, I feel sad, I feel fearful, all of these kinds of anxieties and troubles of human life ultimately find the freedom in our discovery of ourselves as this spiritual consciousness. And to do that is to attain moksha. That is what moksha is. Moksha is the term for that. It's in one word, it's called liberation or salvation and so on. But it's really a discovery of ultimately who we are. And what the swastika is, people actually put the swastika in the Hindu tradition. They put the swastika on their outer door. Like you might, if you go to a Hindu home, many homes, they'll have a little, string of leaves. They might have an Om symbol, which is the first symbol that I put in my first slide. And they'll also have this swastika, which basically means I'm aligned. This home has aligned their life with this fourfold path, with the idea that it's not just that we are material beings and need to find material security, comfort, and happiness, but we need to align ourselves with the greater order of dharma and discover ourselves as spiritual beings in this world. And the swastika, not that every family that has that up is necessarily totally dedicated to that, I'll be honest, but that is the intent, that hopefully when that is put, and in fact, not only just at home, I remember a couple of years back, we had bought a new microwave, and my aunt was visiting from India, and she immediately got a bottle of turmeric. So turmeric is a common spice that's used in all Indian foods. It's also used as in religious ceremonies. She immediately got a bottle of turmeric, and she put, and you can exactly like the picture is right here. She put the swastika with the 4 dots, and it's indicative of, even when you buy something as simple as a microwave or a car or a book or anything like that, that is something to be aligned with a higher consciousness and a higher good. It's not just about you owning a cool microwave or a cool car or whatever. And so it's obviously a great tragedy that this symbol, which originally had such a deep meaning, has been sort of had been co-opted and turned into such a tragic story. And so I'm going to pause here. I think Apoorva is going to take over from here and talk more about practically what's going on with the swastika in the Hindu community today. But we can come back later if you guys have any other questions. But I'll pass it forward to my good friend Apoorva, and she'll take it from here.
Thank you so much, Vinodji. As Vinodji said, next up we have Apoorvakasem. She's an alum of Georgia Tech, and currently she's working as a senior product manager through the Venture for America Fellowship. She has been an active member of the Hindu community since childhood, started a Bhagavad Gita book club in college, a blog, and shares tidbits about Hindu culture on her Instagram. Apoorva?
Namaste. Thank you, Praneeth, for the introduction. And as everyone before me has already said, I just want to say thank you so much to OSU Hillel and Hindu Yuva for planning and organizing this discussion. This topic definitely is a sensitive one. And I'm so glad that we're able to have this conversation with each other and grow and learn from each other. Do you mind going to the next slide, please? Awesome. So speaking about the swastika, what does swastika even mean? Let's take it back a little bit and go to Sanskrit. Sanskrit, as we know, Sanskrit is one of the base roots, base languages of Hinduism. And in Sanskrit, swastika actually means something. Swa means good, and asti means to be. So when we say swastika, it is something that we're saying is conducive to well-being. It is a symbol of peace, prosperity, and good fortune in general. So like Vinodji mentioned before me, this is something that we use a lot in new homes. We use it when we do car pujas. Pujas are like little rituals that we do. So when we buy a new car or when Vinodji bought a new microwave, we use the swastika to bring good fortune to that. We also use it in temples and mandirs within our homes, as well as outside when you go to main temples. And next slide, please. As Vinodji mentioned, one of the meanings of the swastika is the four purusharthas, the dharma, artha, kama, moksha. It helps us learn more about our identity and ourselves. And it's a symbol for us to look at and remember that we need to figure out who we are. It also represents the four directions. So each of the arms could represent north, east, south, west. It could represent the four Vedas. The Vedas are the Hindu scriptures. And there are many, many other meanings for the swastika when we look at. And the swastika actually is not just a Hindu symbol, but has been shown in many other traditions as well. Like the Buddhists believe that the swastika is an embodiment of Buddha's heart and footprints, as well as each of the arms representing one of the four noble truths. The Jains also use this symbol to represent a liberated soul, showing other souls how to be liberated as well. And each of the arms represent a way for the soul to be reborn between birth and death. It's also been shown, like Wade has mentioned, in many other traditions in the past. And so this is definitely a symbol that predates a lot of what we hear and what we know about. Next slide, please. So the origin of the Nazi symbol, if you can see the top left, the symbol there, it shows the Nazi symbol next to the Hindu swastika. And they look a little different. The Nazi symbol has a black border with arms tilted and a white circle and a red flag, whereas the Hindu one is usually red and sometimes has dots in the middle. And the Nazi symbol, one of the ways that Hitler or the Nazi party must have seen it is through churches. So Hitler actually went to Lambeck Abbey in Austria, a Christian monastery that he attended as a kid. And the bottom left picture is a picture of the Lambeck Abbey. And next to it is something that they showed inside the church. It's the hooked cross, the Heikenkreuz, as Germans called it, and as Taylor has mentioned before as well. And it was shown in a lot of different churches and a lot of different monasteries. And on the top right, there's a brochure there that I can't pronounce the German version, but it translates to the cross and the hooked cross. And the cross of Christ and the Heikenkreuz, or the hooked cross. So that's a brochure that the Nazi party used to share amongst each other. And in the middle, the black and white picture, that is from a Nazi rally where Nazi youth stood in the sign of a hooked cross to pay respects to the fallen soldier. So how did something that was shown in all of these different places get labeled as the swastika? We'll look at that in the next slide. On the left, you'll see a paragraph from Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's autobiography, where he mentions the Heikenkreuz. When it was translated to English by James Vincent Murphy, who was a Catholic priest, he translated Heikenkreuz to swastika, but swastika wasn't an English word. So how did he get swastika? If you look at these GIFs on the right, these are GIFs that I actually took. And if you look at it on the top, if I went from German to English and looked up Heiken, it comes up as hook. And if I look up Kreuz, it comes up as cross. When I typed in Heiken space Kreuz, it came as hook cross. But when I took out the space there, it came up as swastika. So that's really confusing. And then if you look at the bottom one, from English to German, if I typed hooked cross, it shows as Hakenkreuz. But when I use the arrows to switch it, Hakenkreuz became swastika. So that too is quite confusing. And whether intentional or not, this was by James Vincent Murphy. He probably didn't want to associate the Nazi movement with Christianity and decided to not connect it to the hooked cross. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons we're having this discussion right now is because of the New York Senate Bill 6648. And what the bill is trying to do in New York is to instruct 6th through 12th graders and show them symbols of hatred, the noose as one and the swastika as another. And that's 1 million kids in New York alone learning about the hatred of the swastika. Just backing it up a little personally, I have many friends, and I've heard from many Hindu Americans as well, where they were bullied for this symbol. And like Vinodji mentioned, we use the symbol very, very often. We use it in our notebooks, trying to, like Vinodji mentioned, trying to realize that we're still trying to figure out who we are. And by learning, we're hoping to continue on this path of self-journey. And one such story, there was a 3rd grader, a friend, who was told to draw something that represented her and bring it to school the next day. So she brought a picture of the swastika, and the teacher, the swastika, because it was part of her mandir, part of her temple at home, and part of her religious beliefs. So when she brought it to school the next day, she presented the swastika, and the teacher ran out crying and then also sent her to the principal's office. And so now she was sent to the principal's office, didn't know why, didn't know what was happening. And from there, she learned about, why the swastika is a hatred symbol and a symbol that should not be used and should not be presented. And she carried that embarrassment for a really long time. She carried the embarrassment of being Hindu and the embarrassment of using the swastika for a really long time. And unfortunately, that's not a unique instance. I've had many friends tell me stories similar to this, where they tried to use it and tried to be proud of it, but also were not able to in good faith. Another example, another thing that happens is when we do car puja. So when we buy a new car, we do a little ritual to thank the car and to wish for a safe journey. And when we do this, we draw a swastika on that car puja, on that car. And as part of the puja, we leave the swastika on there. And there have been many instances where these cars have been beaten and destroyed because of the swastika that has been shown on that as well. And we don't condone the use of the Nazi symbol at all. That symbol of oppression, the Hakenkreuz, should not be used. And it should be taught as a symbol of hatred. What we hope to accomplish is a clear difference between the swastika and the Hakenkreuz, and a clear education on the history of swastika and Hakenkreuz, similar to the discussion we're having today. I think this is a fantastic start and a great way for us to learn from each other and to grow from each other. Next slide. So to close it out, I just wanted to share this part as well. The Hindu and Jewish communities have had and continue to have a great relationship. In 2008, there was a Jewish Hindu leadership summit where religious heads from both groups met and discussed how we can continue to work together. They also released a statement about the swastika and its importance in Hindu culture before it was misappropriated. We recognize and understand the trauma this symbol close to it carries for the Jewish community, and for any use of that in an anti-Semitic way, we stand in solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters. We hope that we can find a way where we can learn about the symbol of hatred, but also make sure that people who value the symbol in a good faith way can continue to feel confident to do so. And this can only be done if we work together and learn and educate each other in a holistic way. The two groups, the Hindu and Jewish groups, have worked very well together in the past, and I'm glad we're able to carry that forward today as well. So to conclude, I would like to thank Rabbi Taylor and Wade for having this discussion with us, and for both of us and the communities to learn from each other. By the Jewish and Hindu communities working together, I look forward to continuing this camaraderie and strengthening bonds. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Apoorva, for that beautiful perspective on the swastika from the Hindu community and Hindu narrative. So we would like to, one is very similar to what Apoorvo just answered regarding the bill in New York State. And so I'll ask a question to the panel. In regard to the New York bill, what would be legislation that would benefit both the Hindu and Jewish communities?
I'm sorry, Jack. You kind of broke up there and it was very hard to hear. Would you mind either repeating yourself or putting the question in the chat?
Yes, Wade. So the question to the panel is, in regard to the New York bill, what would be legislation that would benefit both the Hindu and Jewish communities?
I can share my perspective. So the bill itself, if you read it, it just shares this blanket statement of calling the swastika as a symbol of hate. And what I think a lot of us would benefit from is learning the true history behind it, just like we talked about here, from both a dharmic perspective as well as a Jewish perspective, learning the difference and learning how they were unfortunately intertwined, but unintentionally. That was not, the purpose at all. And understanding the difference between the swastika and the Hakenkreuz, I think, is one way that we can make sure that this continues to be educational and helpful.
I mean, I'll just add one little piece. I think the way one way the bill could be made a bit better is that mandate the teaching of both at some grade level. Mandate the teaching of the Hakenkreuz and how it is used as a hate symbol, as well as the teaching of the origins of the swastika and what it means in Hindu Jain tradition and so on. So I think if both are taught, because both have to be known, so and mandating that and educating that in both directions, kind of like we're doing here today, I think that would be ideal. That's my feeling.
I agree. I think it's complicated, and there's both different types of meanings that come to it, and it's important. Education is the foundation for making sure that we understand each other's cultures and can avoid this type of hatred in the future.
I can go on and ask another question to you guys. So one thing that happens a lot, is people travel outside of America as well. And so a lot of people travel to countries like India, where the swastika is used widely, right? And there's normally a culture shock when people travel to other countries and experience new cultures for the first time. But seeing this new symbol might come as a heightened culture shock when the intent behind the symbol was completely different in India than the intent of the Hakenkreuz. So how can we possibly mitigate the culture shock that comes when traveling to countries to the east?
I think in large part that's due to education. If it's not something that people know about, then they can't expect it, and they can't understand it. But if it's something that they can learn about, then it's something that they can prepare themselves for and understand that while it might mean something in the culture that you inhabit. It means something else in different cultures.
One question we got from our viewers is, was the word swastika used by the German-speaking world during the war, or was it still called Hakenkreuz outside the English translations?
Sorry, real quick, Praneeth. I just got a text from someone asking, how do they submit questions?
So if you have a question, you can just type it into the Facebook Live or the YouTube Live. Just type it into the live comments and they'll be read out. So just to repeat the question from the other viewer, was the word swastika used by the German-speaking world during the war, or was it still called Hakenkreuz outside the English translations?
So from my research and from my understanding, there was never a mention of swastika. It was always called the Hakenkreuz.
I also believe that that is correct. I think that once the Nazis did appropriate the swastika to become the Hakenkreuz, it was never mentioned anywhere as to being a swastika, I think, ever again. It was permanently the Hakenkreuz. It was their appropriated symbol.
So then kind of going off of that, do you think there can possibly be this separation of language in the future to differentiate between these cultures? How do you guys think that would work?
I think that in the back of my mind, I want it to be possible. I want there to be a huge distinction between the swastika and the Hakenkreuz. I want there to be a big dichotomy between them. I want to be a huge space. But in the back of my head, I also think about Holocaust survivors who I've talked to who just call it the swastika. I think of people who really connect the word swastika to the symbol of Nazi Germany. As terrible as that is, I think about those people and I think about trying to explain to them how it's a symbol of peace and harmony for different people around the world, and getting the hand like, you don't know what you're talking about, kid, get out of here. So I want it to be possible, and I would be open up to so many. I would be thrilled if somebody came to me with a way to educate people with separating the difference between the Hakenkreuz and the swastika. Because as I said when I spoke earlier, people see it as one and the same. And it would be a Herculean effort to try and separate the two images. But I think it's worth a shot.
So I'd like to make a comment on this. So I think, this is the conversion of the swastika from a symbol of peace and auspiciousness and so forth to the hate symbol that everybody sees it as, that has taken years. And there's so many decades of events and tragedy that has done that conversion. And so it's not something that, tomorrow we can, we're just gonna, pass a bill or do whatever and it's gonna happen. I think my feeling, at least in the United States, is that the Indian community and the Jewish community should meet more often. You don't have to talk about the swastika per se. Like me and Wade are now good friends. We can talk about it. He's a good guy. I think I'm a good guy. I think we can build a relationship. And as you build relationship, an openness develops. You can't expect today, I'm gonna publish this PowerPoint about the history of the swastika, and then that's gonna transform things. That's not how it works. It's gonna take a lot of time and a lot of relationship generating events and a process in which really you build trust. And once that trust is really built up, it could be at the level of nations between India and Israel. It could be at the level of communities between the Jewish community and the Indian community here. But once that really develops, then all of this is much, much more possible. I think short-term solutions and kind of quick passes of this or that, that's going to be unsuccessful. But I do believe it's possible. It may take 10 years or 20 or 30, 50, but I think it's worth doing.
If I may offer back, Vinod, because I genuinely want to hear your points on this. What about those people who just simply are not ready to move past this ideal? What about those people who the swastika, whether regular, straight or curved as was explained, it is a symbol of anti-Semitism, of Jewish hatred. The Haken Cruz was drawn as a swastika on the tombs of Worms. So I think the gravestones in Worms. So it's just very, it seems like such a difficult way, not even to start how. I think starting now is an interesting idea and should be explored more. But I wonder, when is the right time to start? I can think in my head, if not now, when? Like, exactly, this, it should be now. But the Jewish community has only just repopulated to the point where it was before World War II. Mm-hmm. Jewish community is still trying to heal from the wounds. I think it's going to be very, very difficult to try and do such a thing beyond any. I simply don't see it happening within our lifetimes, to be perfectly honest.
So, I mean, I don't have any, 5-point plan or anything like that. But I think, me and you we're talking. You have been, you guys are gracious enough to even open to this. The fact that Hillel as an organization would be open to listening to what we have. I mean, it could have been that Jack just decided, you know what, Praneeth, you're out of your mind. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then we wouldn't have had this event at all. So I think I agree that there's obviously people who have such deep scars that it may not be possible for them. And that's totally understandable. And there's no reason to expect that to change. But say a generation down, when the relationship between the Indian community and the Jewish community, I'm not saying the relationship has to develop because we want to change what you think of as a swastika. The relationship should change. The relationship should develop on purely a basis of mutual trust and developing friendship. And as a byproduct, it's possible that over time, there is a kind of, like, for example, suppose tomorrow, I'm just giving this as an example. Suppose tomorrow you were going to go to an Indian Mela, an Indian festival. We have lots of festivals where you can get great food. And it's possible that you would tomorrow go to a booth that would maybe be some type of cultural booth, and they would have, henna painting and this and that, and who knows what else, music going on. And you might see a small swastika over there. And I imagine that tomorrow, even though it may cause you a similar kind of shock that you maybe experienced with your Kung Fu teacher, or with who knows how many very stressful incidences, but that maybe there's one strand of you that might be like, oh, you know what, this swastika and the swastika that they were putting up in the Newport party, which is despicable. These are two completely different scenarios. And even though the same pain might arise, a little strand of possibility of maybe even going and say, hey, how are you guys doing? Tell me about, why are you may even ask them, why did you guys put this up? And maybe they'll be like, and maybe there could be a dialogue there. It's not, I totally agree that this is something that it may seem like it's impossible, and maybe it is for a short while, but I still feel that we have to allow for the possibility that healing can occur, because, that's progress, right? A healing from these kinds of wounds as humanity is what both from the Hindu tradition we want to seek out, and I think everybody in the world wants to seek, and to put as a total impossibility that healing is not possible. And I know it's probably an immense, maybe it's not possible, but we have to keep that possibility alive and allow it to at least potentially come to fruition. Otherwise, I feel like we're closing a door that, if opened, would be an immense benefit to all communities and in mankind in general. I don't have a plan exactly, but I think.
No, I love the idea of healing through dialogue and building relationship. Thank you, Vinod. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Thank you, Wade.
All right, then. Thank you guys so much. And if the audience has any more questions about the significance of the swastika, please feel free to reach out to Hindu Yuva through our Facebook page, through our Instagram, or OSU Hillel. Our time is up for today, and I just wanted to thank you guys all for joining and participating in this intercultural discussion. As many of our panelists have already mentioned, dialogue between groups is very important in today's society to promote mutual respect. It's important for both of our cultures, along with all others, to understand the true intent of our messages. And part of this has to do a lot with ourselves. We have to be willing to leave our comfort zone and ask questions. A lack of awareness is one of the greatest evils in today's world. And the only way it can be overcome is if we are willing to talk and to continuously seek out knowledge from each other. Jack, do you want to finish off?
I'll love to. Thank you very, very much, Praneeth. So yeah, we would like to challenge each and every one of you to continue this discussion at home, with your family, and with your friends to strengthen our wonderful allyship and community that we share together. So thank you to all of our panelists for this amazing dialogue, and Mithalesh for behind the scenes tech work. And of course, thank you to all the viewers who are able to join us, whether live or afterwards. So namaste and shalom.